My brother Caleb was the only one who died when his bus crashed into a pole. After that, Dad started coaching a boy named Logan who had the same throwing style as Caleb, and even started calling him Cal during practice. I found Dad one day at a remote campground, making Logan wear Caleb's old jersey, pushing him through drills while the boy sobbed, "I want to go home." I called 911 immediately. After being released from a psychiatric hold, Dad rented a storage unit and set up 2 bedrooms inside, one filled with Caleb's belongings, the other decorated like it was meant for Logan. 6 years ago, Caleb had been sitting on that bus. Because of where he was seated, he was the only passenger who didn't survive. Dad spent 6 hours standing at the crash site, touching the blood-stained pole and whispering, "Get up, champ. Coach needs you to get up." The police had to physically remove him. At first, I thought we were supporting each other. We went through Caleb's trophies, watched his game footage, and sat in silence whenever ESPN aired his old matches. I thought I understood grief. I thought when Dad started coaching Little League again, it meant he was healing. But I never realized when he started staying late after practice with just one kid, Logan, who had Caleb's same southpaw pitch. "This kid's got potential," Dad would say, mimicking Logan's wind-up at the dinner table. "Throws just like Cal did back then." It made my stomach churn, but I chalked it up to Dad being an over-enthusiastic coach, until he began showing up unannounced at Logan's house, arms full of extra gear. That's when I knew I had to be more actively involved. No pun intended. Yeah, I know my sense of humor is a little dark. "Dad, maybe give the family some space?" I'd say. But he'd wave me off. "His parents don't get baseball, Eric. They don't see what that kid could become." After weeks of him skipping work to monitor Logan's practices and bombarding the kid's mom with texts about development programs, I stopped protesting. I was barely holding it together myself and figured his obsession was just a coping mechanism. But then it escalated. I was doom-scrolling on TikTok when I heard Dad call Logan Cal during a drill. Thought I was imagining it until I looked up and saw he'd given the boy Caleb's exact brand and size of cleats. On the ride home, I tried to have a real talk, but Dad just looked at me with this intensity and said, "Caleb's teaching me through him, Eric. I can feel it." That night at dinner, he barely looked at me, glued to his phone, texting Logan's mom about a big tournament he'd signed the boy up for without asking anyone. Then he disappeared to the batting cages for hours. Other parents began complaining too, saying Dad was pulling their kids aside to explain why Logan was special, just like Caleb had been. One Saturday, Dad woke me for dawn. "It's the tournament, the big one." I thought he meant he was finally ready to visit Caleb's grave. But he packed the truck with coolers and camping gear, humming Caleb's old walk-up song, manic with energy. I should have asked where the tournament was. I should have known. Around noon, my neighbor, Jace, called me in a panic. Logan's parents had shown up at our house with the police. My stomach dropped. Jace had found a note in Dad's truck talking about a special training camp 3 states away, the one Caleb had always dreamed of attending. I drove straight to the campground Dad had marked on an old map from Caleb's room. As I got close, I heard shouting in the woods. Dad had Logan out there, dressed in Caleb's practice jersey, forcing him through drills. The kid, maybe 11 years old, was crying, "I want to go home. You said my mom said it was okay." But Dad kept barking in his coach voice, "Caleb never quit. You're better than this." "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, shaking. He looked at me, eyes brimming with tears, overjoyed. "Eric, you came! Look, Caleb's been working on his slider. Show your brother, Cal." Logan ran to me the second he saw me. "He said we were just going to the sports store," he cried. I helped him into my car while Dad spiraled, shouting, "Don't confuse him! You're ruining his focus!" He lunged to pull Logan back, but I held on and got us out. Dad chased after us, screaming that I was destroying Caleb's second chance. "He needs this camp. Don't let him become another wasted gift." When I told the 911 operator I had the boy with me, Dad's face drained of all color. No, 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 no! His mom agreed! She signed the permission slip! He pulled out a clearly forged document. Caleb told me what to write, he said. He speaks to me through the pitches. When the police arrived, Dad completely lost it. He tried to barricade himself inside his truck with Caleb's old equipment bag. It took 4 officers to drag him out while he kicked and wailed, "Eric, tell them Caleb's back." They finally got him into the patrol car and he pressed his face against the window, still sobbing. Logan was safely reunited with his terrified parents, who'd been searching for him for 5 hours. Dad had apparently convinced Logan to come along by telling him his parents had arranged for special coaching and would meet them there. After Dad's arrest, a psychiatric evaluation deemed him unfit to stand trial. He was placed in a state facility for what was supposed to be 6 months, or so I thought. Just a month later, he was released for being a model patient. But he wasn't out to heal, he was out for Logan. That's how the message phrased it. And when I read those words, I froze. A link followed. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when he'd just been let out. My phone buzzed again. Sarah, my girlfriend, had sent me a screenshot from a true crime YouTube channel. The thumbnail had Dad's mugshot side by side with Logan's school photo. Bold red text blared across the image. Coach gone mad. The Caleb replacement story. I scrolled through the comments. Hundreds of strangers dissecting our family's pain like it was a murder mystery. Someone had even dug up Caleb's obituary and posted it for context. My hand shook as I slammed the app shut. The doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Chen, our family therapist from before Dad's breakdown. She carried a folder and wore that carefully composed sympathy expression I'd grown to despise. I opened the door, and she immediately launched into her practiced speech. Dad had made tremendous progress, she said. He acknowledged the delusions. He understood now. Logan wasn't Caleb. Caleb was gone. Nothing could change that. The words were right, but something in his tone, in the way he smiled just a second too long, it made my skin crawl. This version of him, this manufactured clarity, felt more dangerous than the man who'd been lost in delusions. Back at my apartment, I found 3 of Caleb's trophies moved from the shelf to my coffee table, arranged in a perfect triangle. In the center sat the spare key I'd given Dad years ago, and on my pillow was Caleb's rookie baseball card, the one Dad had bought him for his 8th birthday, the one that should have still been in Dad's storage unit. My phone lit up again, a message from Jace. He'd installed a doorbell cam after the kidnapping incident. The footage from 3 a.m. showed Dad standing outside my door, completely still, just standing there for 17 minutes. Then he let himself in. I changed the locks that same day, but the damage was already done. He wanted me to know he could still get in, that he was thinking about it, planning something. Jeremy's parents contacted a lawyer to pursue a restraining order, and the legal path was more tangled than expected. Dad's psychiatric release had thrown a wrench into everything. The facility had declared him stable and compliant with his treatment plan, and the month-long involuntary hold had already exhausted most of the system's limited recourse. Without a new incident or immediate threat, the lawyer explained, there wasn't much they could do. That evening, I found Dad sitting in Caleb's favorite diner in our old booth. 3 plates of food sat on the table, including Caleb's usual chicken fingers and fries. He smiled as I slid into the seat across from him and calmly pushed a manila folder across the table. Inside were pages and pages of journal entries from his time in the facility. Each entry meticulously documented Logan's routine, his school schedule, after-school habits, snack preferences, even his fears. The depth of detail was chilling. Somehow, even from inside a locked psychiatric ward, Dad had compiled all this information. The final entry was dated the day before. Tomorrow I get to make things right, not by replacing Caleb, but by protecting Logan the way I couldn't protect Caleb. Eric will understand. He has to. That's when it hit me. Dad hadn't spent his time inside getting better. He'd spent it getting sharper. He'd learned the right things to say, the right expressions to wear. He'd played the model patient while his obsession quietly transformed into something more deliberate. While he was away, he'd somehow built a connection with Logan's babysitter's family. The babysitter's mom believed he was just a grieving father recovering from a breakdown. She'd been unknowingly feeding him updates about Logan, thinking she was helping his healing process. Meanwhile, the president of the local baseball league called an emergency meeting after multiple parents complained about Dad lurking near practices. But Dad arrived armed, with a note from his psychiatrist. It cleared him to resume coaching and emphasized the therapeutic benefits of returning to normal community activities. After that, I started watching him more closely. One afternoon, I noticed he'd left his truck unlocked at the baseball field. Inside, I found a receipt dated that morning for brand new youth baseball equipment, all in Logan's sizes: cleats, glove, batting helmet. In the glove compartment, I found something worse: an apartment lease application for a unit just 3 blocks from Logan's school. Then Logan's teacher called me. Dad had visited the school and signed in as Logan's grandfather. He asked specific, probing questions about Logan's academic performance. The teacher didn't realize anything was off until she mentioned the visit to Logan's mom during pickup. At first, Sarah sided with Dad. She'd always believed in second chances and advocated for mental health awareness. Dad had texted her a thank you message, praising her for believing in family healing. She thought I was being paranoid. We fought about it over dinner. She showed me articles Dad had sent her about successful psychiatric rehabilitation and community reintegration. Everything changed when she found something in her phone. She'd been looking for an old photo when she came across a screenshot from Caleb's social media, posted 2 years before his death. "Dad's scaring the Morrison kid again. Why does he always pick left-handed pitchers?" The Morrison family had moved away abruptly 3 years before Caleb died. I'd never connected it to Dad, not until then. It got worse. Dad had started a grief support group specifically for fathers who had lost athletic sons. Through that group, he recruited Logan's uncle, whose daughter had died of cancer the year before. Through him, Dad had found yet another line into Logan's family. Then my boss called me into his office. Someone had filed a formal complaint. I was accused of harassing a mentally ill man, my recovering father. They claimed I was skipping work to stalk him. I received an official warning. Dr. Chen wasn't much help either. During one of our required family therapy sessions, she waved away my concerns. "Your father has made tremendous progress," she insisted. "Maybe you need to reflect on your resistance to healing." She gestured toward a photo on her desk, her son wearing a baseball uniform. I couldn't help but wonder if Dad had noticed it too. I followed him one night to a storage unit on the other side of town. Through a narrow crack in the door, I watched him moving furniture. Inside were 2 bedrooms. One side was filled with all of Caleb's belongings, perfectly preserved. The other was newly furnished, decorated in Logan's favorite colors, with posters of his favorite athletes on the wall. The manager of the facility spotted me there, but instead of kicking me out, he quietly pulled me aside. He told me he'd been concerned about Dad's behavior, about how he'd talk to himself during visits. Sometimes he cried, sometimes he laughed. And as Dad's listed emergency contact, he thought I should know. The manager allowed me to document everything inside the unit. The walls were covered with photos of Logan, action shots from games, school pictures, and candid images clearly taken from a distance. A timeline at the bottom of the display revealed something horrifying. Dad had been planning this not since his release, but since the time of his arrest. Soon, other baseball parents began comparing notes. Dad knew things he shouldn't: food allergies, fears, favorite movies. One mom realized he knew her custody schedule better than her ex-husband did. I traced the rental agreement for the storage unit. It dated back to the week before Caleb's death. In a box labeled Prospects, I found photos of 3 other boys. All left-handed pitchers, all about Caleb's age at the time their families had suddenly moved away. Logan's coach, Rob, admitted that Dad had been helping him draw up practice plans. He said Dad had seemed knowledgeable and enthusiastic, so much so that my warnings had started to sound overblown. But then Rob's wife stopped me at the grocery store. Something about Dad had made her uneasy. He'd asked if Logan could sleep over after an upcoming tournament. She'd started keeping a log of their conversations in her phone. When Dad got wind of her suspicions, Rob received a sudden offer to coach in another district, an offer too convenient to be coincidence. The confrontation at the hardware store happened on a Thursday. Logan's father had finally had enough. He cornered Dad in the fasteners aisle and told him in no uncertain terms to stay away from his son. Dad's response stunned everyone. Calm, collected, his voice smooth with empathy. "I think about Logan every night. Isn't that what any good parent wants? An extra set of eyes looking out for their child. Isn't that what community is?" The way he said it, so reasonable, so earnest, made it difficult to push back without sounding paranoid. That was Dad's new strategy. No longer the erratic, desperate man from before, but someone rational, articulate, someone who made you sound unhinged for worrying. Then he started talking to Sarah. He told her I had jealousy issues going back to childhood, dredging up old memories I barely recalled. Dad showed her real therapy notes from when I was 15, from after Caleb broke his arm. In those notes, I'd admitted feeling left out, like I couldn't measure up to their bond. Dad spun those words, painting me as unstable. He claimed I was hoarding Caleb's journal, obsessively clinging to the past. I recognized the tactic immediately, from an old journal entry of Caleb's I'd finally brought myself to read. He called it Dad's divide and conquer strategy. Make everyone doubt the person who sees through him. Create enough confusion that people start questioning their own judgment. Caleb had seen it happen to the Morrison family. He watched Dad systematically isolate anyone who questioned him. One morning, Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor, approached me while I checked the mail. She quietly told me she'd seen Dad outside Logan's bedroom window at night, just watching, like he was checking on his own son. She'd been keeping detailed logs for 2 weeks, times, dates, notes, because her husband had once been stalked by a business partner, and she knew how important documentation was. The babysitter's mom started doubting Dad after he slipped up during a coffee chat and called Logan by Caleb's name. She noticed his medical bracelet wasn't just for identification. It contained a GPS tracker, part of his outpatient monitoring. Realizing he'd been under surveillance the entire time made her start questioning everything else she'd overlooked. During a family dinner at my apartment, I deliberately placed my phone on the table and recorded Dad as he described Logan's bedtime routine in flawless detail. He knew the names of the boys' stuffed animals. He knew which nightlight was used. He knew how many times Logan's mother typically checked in before midnight. I'd made sure I followed single-party consent laws. The recording was clear, unambiguous. A few days later, police visited Logan's family to discuss the restraining order. Turns out it had never been properly filed, lost in some administrative void. The officer recommended family mediation instead. No immediate violation meant no protective action. The system, it seemed, was designed to protect Dad's rights, not Logan's safety. Mrs. Patterson offered me her observation logs and agreed to keep watching Dad's movements. She even began teaching me basic counter-surveillance techniques her husband had learned in the military. How to vary routes, spot familiar cars, and keep mental notes of anyone who appeared in multiple places throughout the day.
DJ's security cameras uncovered something deeply unsettling. Dad had been testing emergency response times in Logan's neighborhood. He used different payphones to call 911, reporting fake emergencies, then timed how long it took for officers to arrive. He was studying the system's weak spots. Then, a woman from Dad's grief support group contacted me after a church gathering. She said Dad had been talking about second chances with sons, about how God sometimes let fathers make things right the second time around. Pastor Lewis had grown concerned and asked her to quietly check in on us. At the next PTA meeting, Dad volunteered to chaperone the upcoming school field trip. I kept calm and composed, even as other parents remarked on the contrast between my reserved demeanor and Dad's eager, cheerful involvement. Logan's mother caught my eye across the room and silently mouthed, "Thank you for not causing a scene." Logan's family began quietly planning a sudden vacation to get away from the area, but they needed 3 days to sort out work and school obligations. Coincidentally, or not, Dad casually mentioned over coffee that he was completely free all next week. The timing unsettled everyone. Then the babysitter admitted something that sent a chill down my spine. Dad had offered her $500 to bring Logan to the park alone. He claimed it was for surprise party planning, said he needed Logan's help picking themes and activities. She showed me the crisp bills, brand new, sequentially numbered. During Little League registration, Dad's mask slipped. When he saw that Logan's name wasn't on the roster, his whole body shook with barely contained rage. He caught himself quickly, but not before one parent, sensing something was wrong, started recording on his phone. Later, Dad approached me with Caleb's prized glove, the one he'd caught his first no-hitter with. He held it out like an offering. "You can have it if you stop interfering with what's meant to be." When I refused, his expression went blank, cold. It was like staring at a stranger wearing my father's face. Tom's wife had been documenting Dad's comments and requests, and she began showing her notes to other parents. A small group quietly formed, concerned parents willing to monitor Dad's movements without tipping him off. They set up a shared calendar, tracking his known locations and activity patterns. Then Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. She found proof Dad had lied about his breakthrough in therapy. The timeline no longer made sense. That storage unit he rented? It predated Caleb's death. That fact reframed everything. The photos of other boys in the prospects box, all left-handed pictures, all roughly Caleb's age, made my stomach drop. Hospital records confirmed it. His supposed breakthrough had happened in the first week of treatment. The rest of his time was spent planning, pretending, practicing the role of the recovered man. He'd even been researching custody law in the facility's library. Only a handful of families still defended him, mostly those whose children hadn't made varsity. They appreciated the attention, the mentorship. They didn't see the threat in his obsessive focus. Dad had cultivated those relationships carefully, always telling each parent exactly what they wanted to hear. After our last meeting, I found his notebook left behind in the diner booth. Inside were pages labeled Jeremy Integration Plan. It was organized into 4 phases: befriend, isolate, rescue, and relocate. The final phase was dated for the following week. Each section had sub-steps, contingencies, and backups. It was disturbingly thorough. Sarah chose to support me, even when her parents accused her of being unsupportive of mental health recovery. They said she was enabling my paranoia and turning against family values. But she moved in with me anyway, bringing only what she needed, and setting up digital security protocols on every device. We created code words, daily check-ins, and stored everything in cloud folders with multiple layers of backup. Sarah built spreadsheets cross-referencing Dad's movements with Logan's schedule to detect patterns and potential danger zones. As furious as I was at Dad's manipulation, I refused to plant evidence or embellish his actions. I told Logan's parents the truth was already horrifying enough. And then came the moment that confirmed everything. Dad confronted me at a gas station. He accused me, again, of being jealous of his bond with Caleb. But in his rant, he slipped. He revealed that he knew where Logan's family was planning to vacation. They hadn't told anyone, not even their closest friends.
I caught Dad's slip-up on my phone's recording app. It was clear as day. He knew Logan's secret vacation plans. After that, 3 different families came forward confirming they'd seen Dad in places he'd claimed never to have been. They began logging sightings in a shared document, complete with photos when available. The evidence painted a chilling picture. Dad wasn't just watching Logan, he was keeping tabs on multiple children. Even his last few supporters began pulling back. They noticed how his questions about their own children's routines had become overly detailed, invasive. One mom recalled how he'd taken notes during a casual chat about her daughter's swim practices. A disturbing pattern emerged at his grief support meetings. Dad had been targeting fathers of athletic children between the ages of 10 and 12, with a sharp preference for left-handed kids. Every prospect matched Caleb's profile at that age. Concerned parents responded by organizing a phone tree and a discreet neighborhood watch. They never mentioned Dad by name, but their actions spoke volumes. School pickups and drop-offs were coordinated. No child was left alone, ever. At church, Dad broke down during the prayer request portion of the service, tearfully claiming I was stealing his second chance at fatherhood. Pastor Lewis gently led him to a quiet room, showing the calm, compassionate restraint of someone familiar with mental health crises. The rest of the congregation watched with a complicated mix of concern and disbelief. 5 families approached me after the service. They apologized, formally and sincerely, for not believing me earlier. 2 had even been Dad's defenders. Their support felt like real validation after weeks of being accused of paranoia and jealousy. As parents began quietly working together, Dad's options dwindled. Practice times were changed at the last minute, locations were rotated. Children were never left unsupervised. The community had built an invisible wall of protection around Logan. DJ's digging turned up another family, one Dad had approached 2 years ago. Their son, Jake, was another left-handed pitcher with potential. The family had moved suddenly after Dad offered to privately coach the boy. Jake's mother confirmed that Dad's behavior had intensified until they no longer felt safe staying in town. It all matched the pattern. I did everything I could to support Logan's family, helping them build safety into their routine without making Logan feel like a prisoner. We crafted the illusion of normalcy, all while implementing layers of quiet security. 12 families now participated in the protection network. They rotated driving duties, randomly adjusted practice plans, and maintained alternate safe routes for getting around. It worked seamlessly, despite having no official structure. Dad's attempts to get information were increasingly desperate. He started offering rare baseball cards to kids trying to trade for practice schedules. But the parents were ready. They warned their children to never accept anything from him. The community center caught him sneaking in after hours to copy the youth program's roster. He claimed he was updating coaching contacts, but the sign-in sheet showed he'd entered through a side door left propped open. The coordinator escorted him out and called me immediately. Local coaches began warning each other at their regional meetings. Word about Dad spread quickly through the tightly knit baseball network. No one wanted their programs compromised. Then, Sarah uncovered the storage unit payment history. Dad had rented it the day after Caleb's funeral. 6 years ago. He'd been planning something long before Logan even existed in our lives. That changed everything. It wasn't grief that led him down this path. It was something else. Then, Logan's family car suffered 4 simultaneous flat tires. The mechanic said it wasn't random. Nails had been placed in precise patterns, designed to ensure all 4 failed at once. Security footage from nearby businesses was mysteriously corrupted during the key hours. At the local grocery store, a clerk remembered Dad buying camping supplies. He'd asked specifically about low-traffic routes suitable for traveling with children. He'd said the supplies were for 1 adult and 1 child. Every item matched Logan's size. That was when it hit me. I had to make a choice. I could try to salvage some thread of a relationship with the man who raised me, who once taught me how to hold a bat and patch a scraped knee. Or I could focus on protecting Logan. The choice felt inevitable. But that didn't make it hurt any less.
Blood didn't justify putting an innocent child at risk. So instead of confronting Dad head-on, I coordinated an intervention, with Dr. Chen present. I knew Dad still trusted her, and that trust could help create a controlled space where we might finally reach him without triggering one of his defensive spirals. The meeting was carefully structured. Support group members confronted him gently but firmly about the things he'd said, the second chances with sons, the God-given do-overs. They each shared their experiences independently, not as an ambush, but as a chorus of truths he couldn't explain away. A lay counselor from the church sat quietly, taking notes to pass along to Dad's treatment team. Bit by bit, the house of cards he'd built began to shake. His mask, that composed and reasonable persona, cracked as the weight of collective testimony bore down. For a moment we saw it, the delusion laid bare. the desperate belief that he could fix something, save someone, that it wasn't too late. He agreed to a voluntary psychiatric hold. It felt like a breakthrough, like maybe, just maybe, something real had shifted. I allowed myself a brief moment of hope. Maybe this time, treatment would help him process his grief for what it was, instead of trying to rewrite the ending. 3 hours later, he checked himself out. Because under the law, voluntary patients can leave whenever they want. And he did. Just walked away. The hospital couldn't stop him without fresh evidence of an immediate threat. Dr. Chen called me, her voice trembling. Dad had told her that I was keeping his son from him, and by his son, he meant Logan, not Caleb. She finally understood. This wasn't about grief anymore. It was about ownership. Dad's employer let him go shortly after that. Too many unexplained absences, too many red flags. But he didn't seem upset. He treated it like liberation. He packed his desk with eerie calm, telling coworkers he had more important responsibilities now. In the meantime, 23 families banded together to protect Logan. They created a network of safety protocols that operated within the bounds of the law, carefully avoiding any action that might be construed as harassment. They were walking a razor's edge, vigilant, watchful, but legally unassailable. A local news segment picked up the story. It was framed as a human interest piece, a tight-knit neighborhood coming together to keep children safe. They didn't mention our family, or Dad, or Logan, but we all knew what it was really about. Online commenters called Dad a victim, which only fed his persecution complex. I compiled a detailed timeline, 47 pages, documenting his mental decline, manipulations, and increasingly erratic behavior. I submitted it to Adult Protective Services. They reviewed every page and acknowledged the concern, but concluded that he was still too functional to merit involuntary intervention. They told me I should seek therapy to manage my own stress. The breakthrough didn't come from them. It came from a nurse. Hospital security quietly passed along footage of Dad attempting, on multiple nights, to access the pediatric ward. He'd been caught trying to read patient charts, saying he was looking for his son. Each time security escorted him out. No formal reports were filed. But a pediatric nurse recognized Dad from the photo I'd shown of Logan. She revealed something worse. During his volunteer shifts reading to sick children, Dad had been asking targeted questions about athletic boys, ones who needed a father figure. She showed me the visitor log. Certain room numbers were marked with tiny stars. I compiled all the evidence in 3 binders: the timeline, the surveillance logs, the signed witness statements, everything dated, cross-referenced, and corroborated. It was undeniable. Logan's parents presented it all to family court. The judge listened attentively and expressed sincere concern, but because Dad hadn't committed a crime, her hands were tied. She recommended ongoing documentation and heightened awareness. We didn't let the disappointment stop us. The community only grew stronger. They reinforced the protective network around Logan. He could still go to school, play baseball, have friends. He just was never left alone, never left exposed. Then Dad rented an RV. He parked it at the same campground where he'd once taken Logan. He began leaving notes on my windshield, always the same message: camping this weekend. Think Tyler would have liked that. Each one included a printed photo of Caleb's grave. Then Sarah discovered all 4 of our car's tires had been deflated overnight. Not slashed, just deflated. The valves were cleanly removed. Not technically vandalism, but the message was clear. Security footage from our building during that window was mysteriously corrupted. Dad had an alibi. He'd been at a grief support meeting group, signed in and everything. 3 of the families helping protect Logan received threatening letters. The sender, an anonymous legal representative, accused them of interfering with family reunification. The letters referenced private conversations, details that no one outside the inner circle should have known. It was clear. Dad had someone on the inside.
The language in the letters was far too sophisticated for Dad to have written on his own. Someone was helping him. Still, I faced a choice. He wanted me at that campground, lured me there like bait, and I knew it was a trap. But while his focus was on me, the community could protect Logan. So I went, but not alone. Mrs. Patterson's husband, a retired Navy officer, volunteered to accompany me. He had experience with dangerous people and unstable situations. We took separate vehicles, stayed in constant contact, and approached the location with care. The campground looked just like it had the day Dad was arrested, except now he'd transformed it into something worse. 2 tents stood in the clearing, one adult-sized, the other unmistakably meant for a child. Outside sat Caleb's old equipment bag and a cooler filled with Logan's favorite snacks. Dad stepped out from the woods as we arrived. His appearance stunned me. He was thinner, gaunt, and his clothes hung off him. His eyes burned with that manic shine I hadn't seen since the worst days. He smiled as if I'd finally come home, as if this was the moment he'd been waiting for. Near the fire pit, he'd built a shrine. Photos of Caleb covered a makeshift altar, but scattered among them were new images, pictures of Logan. Baseball cards, trophies, and gloves surrounded lit candles. It felt less like a celebration and more like a memorial waiting to happen. Dad began talking. He explained his vision and how Mrs. Patterson's husband casually positioned himself nearby, alert and ready. Dad's delusion had evolved. In his mind, Caleb wasn't gone, he was alive through Logan. All I had to do was accept it. He told me the medication had clouded his thinking. That's why he'd stopped taking it 3 weeks ago. The pills, he said, had muted Caleb's voice. But now, off them, he could hear clearly again. Caleb was guiding him toward Logan. The GPS bracelet on his wrist had been disabled with layers of aluminum foil. While Dad rambled, Mrs. Patterson's husband quietly sent our coordinates to the police. His military calm was unshakable. He stayed passive, non-threatening, but ready to act. I kept Dad talking, kept him deep in his fantasy. Then, I pulled out Caleb's journal. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. It had been locked away, too painful to confront. But now, it was necessary. I turned to the final entries, written just weeks before Caleb's death. He wrote about Dad's intensity, how it made him feel trapped, suffocated, how he feared what would happen if he ever wanted to quit baseball. The line that made my hands tremble as I read it aloud: "If I stop being good at baseball, I don't know if he'll still love me." Dad collapsed. He dropped to his knees, screaming no again and again. For the first time since Caleb died, I saw him truly grieve. Not the performative sorrow, not the angry, misplaced mourning. This was something real, raw. He reached for the journal, but I pulled it away. And just like we'd planned, Jeremy's parents arrived with police moments later, waiting at a distance until the right moment. The timing was exact. There was no risk, no confrontation. As officers moved in, Dad tried one final manipulation. He claimed I had faked the journal. Caleb would never write those things, he insisted. But they'd brought in a handwriting expert, just in case. She compared the entries with Caleb's schoolwork and confirmed their authenticity on the spot. With that, it was over. Dad was placed on an involuntary psychiatric hold. Between the tampered GPS bracelet, the discontinued medication, and the shrine surrounded by evidence of premeditated planning, the court had enough grounds to act. A judge signed the order immediately. As they loaded him into the ambulance, something shifted in him. For the first time in years, his eyes cleared. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said Caleb's name. Then he added 2 words that hit me harder than anything else could have. Caleb's gone. The truth of it, spoken aloud at last, broke something open inside me. The community came together again, this time not in fear, but in hope.
They created a scholarship in Caleb's name for young athletes who loved the game but couldn't afford equipment or league fees. Logan's family made the first donation, grateful that their son was safe. 6 months passed. Then I got a letter. Dad had responded well to treatment, this time in a facility specifically designed for long-term psychiatric care. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start.
His letter arrived on a Tuesday, written by hand on plain white paper. There were no excuses, just a quiet, unflinching apology. He acknowledged the pain he caused and said he would understand if I never forgave him. The most important part? He never mentioned Logan. Not once. I visited Caleb's grave alone for the first time since his funeral. No dad pacing nearby, no forced performance of grief. Just me, my brother, and the silence between us. I told him about the scholarship, how it was helping kids who loved the game the way he did. I told him Logan was safe and Dad was finally getting real help. 2 years later, I found myself sitting in the bleachers, watching Logan pitch during a high school game. He didn't throw like Caleb. He'd developed his own rhythm, his own style, entirely his. His parents waved at me from across the stands. The people who had once banded together in crisis were now something more. Real friends, bound not by fear, but by trust. Dad remained in assisted living. He found a sense of peace in woodworking therapy, shaping quiet creations with his hands. He'd come to terms with Caleb's death and built a calm life inside that acceptance. I visited once a month, boundaries intact, healing, not erasure. Sarah and I married in a small ceremony. Just a few close friends, no drama, no ghosts. We started our life together on our own terms, unburdened by the weight of inherited grief. The loyalty I once mistaken for duty no longer held power over me. Caleb's memory lived on, not through delusions or replacement, but through the kids whose lives were changed by the scholarship. The families who had come together to shield Logan had learned something invaluable. Sometimes love means standing up to the people you're supposed to love the most, especially when they lose their way. What was once an invisible fence of protection had evolved into a visible, thriving support system. I watched as Logan pitch his final inning that day. He was fully his own person, free to succeed or stumble without the weight of my brother's ghost defining his path. That freedom felt like the most honest tribute we could give Caleb. And the scholarship? That's the perfect way to remember him. Not with candles and jerseys, but with chances. Real ones. That moment when Dad finally said, "Caleb's gone," still sends chills down my spine. And watching the original poster visit his brother's grave, just him and the memory, no spectacle, that was powerful. Thanks for being here. I post every day, so check back often. And hey, clean your room, bro.